Okay, so hello, Mr. Thomas Hargrove. Thank you so much for tuning in and for taking time out of your busy day to come on here.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. It's a pleasure. So, listen, first things first, I would like for you to tell myself and my audience who's going to be listening about your murder accountability project.
Okay. Well, my name is Thomas Hargrove. I'm the chairman and founder of a nonprofit group called the Murder Accountability Project. We were established in 2015 for the purpose of creating the most accurate accounting possible for homicides, especially accounting for unsolved murders.
Okay.
And we do quite a bit. There is a kind of magic to carefully counting things, and we'll be talking about that magic throughout your show. But the purpose is to accurately and as completely as possible document Americans who have been murdered. It's astonishing how difficult a challenge that is. And I'll be happy to
Right.
talk about the difficulties we've had. We've had multiple lawsuits against governments that don't completely account, and we've yet to lose, but some of these are quite massive. We have a lawsuit against the federal government because they're in violation of law for not reporting murders that federal law enforcement handles.
Wow.
So
Really?
we do quite a bit. Yes. In fact, I just had a lawyers conference a few days ago. We have two cases pending before U.S. District Judge Amy Berman Jackson. She's kind of famous. She's the judge who tried to put Roger Stone in jail back when
Oh,
those shenanigans were going on. Um, she
right.
um, she is, we think, a blessing for our case because she takes a high view of the Freedom of Information Act and a very high
Okay.
view of accountability for government actions. So
Mm-hmm.
we have high
Okay.
hopes for this case, but it's been going on for 2 or 3 years, and there's no particular end in sight. One does not sue the FBI or the Department of Defense or the Department of the Interior easily, and
Right. I can imagine.
the case is pending. But
Okay.
we do think that in the end we will win and compel government to, as we often say in court, Your Honor, we think the people of the United States have the right to know how they're being murdered and whether those murders are being solved. We've yet to lose
Absolutely.
with that argument. So we do that.
Mhm.
We also try to analyze the data that we do get, and as I said, there's a kind of magic to carefully counting things. And one bit of magic is that it's possible often to spot unrecognized series of murders that have a common killer. And
Mm.
we have a case like that in Chicago right now, and I'm sure you'll want to ask questions about that. We spend a great deal of our time right now, though, trying to cover the data train wreck that the FBI has. The FBI handles the Uniform Crime Report and the Supplementary Homicide Report. These are
Mhm.
decades old accounting systems for major crimes. And the FBI changed their reporting requirements this year. And as a result, this year, half of police departments are about to go dark. They're going to stop reporting data. And that's a
Mm.
major problem. So we're going to try to recover the historical record of homicide this year. And so we're contacting hundreds of police departments and state law enforcement agencies trying to recover data that they are not reporting to the FBI. That's
Wow.
the short list of things we do. So,
Okay, well, that's a lot. That's a lot within itself. And I wish you luck on that lawsuit. You know, you have to
thank
be
you.
pretty bold to sue the federal government. Some
Well, we
people would
have,
run away from that.
oh, no, we have very good lawyers. They live to sue government, and we've given them a really nice case. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, that, that is a challenge, but somebody needs to be trying to create a complete record. The United States is rare among Western governments. If you go to London, England, and ask the Home Office to give you a list of all unsolved murders, if they agree to, they can push a
Hmm.
button and give you a printout of every unsolved murder going back generations. In the
Wow.
United States, we cannot do that. We're one of the few Western democracies that can't do that because there's no master list. So we hope someday Congress puts us out of business, but until that happens, we are trying to create a master list, and that is our function. We're the only entity in the United States whose goal is to create a complete accounting of homicide.
Okay, I absolutely love it. I think that's great. So now, what I want to ask you about is this algorithm that you use, this computer algorithm, because um, does it help you to find like patterns or clusters of where the murder sites were, specifically in Chicago in that case?
Yeah. So as I said, there's a magic to carefully counting things.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that happens is that when a serial killer is active, he can leave statistical marks. What our algorithm does, an algorithm is, it's a fancy word, but what it is a simple series of statistical steps to solve a problem. And what our
Mm-hmm.
algorithm does is it looks at all of the murders reported in the United States every year, and it looks for groups of murders that have a common location, usually a county. We look for murders within each county.
Mm-hmm.
Has a common method of killing, so we look at the weapon that was employed in the murder. Has a common victim, so we look at men and we look at women, because we found that serial killers usually concentrate on either all male victims or all female victims. There are some
Mm-hmm.
equal opportunity serial killers, but by and large, they predominantly kill men or they predominantly kill women. So
Right.
the algorithm looks for uh, uh, murders of the same gender involving the same method of killing in the same geography. And then it
Okay.
does one more thing. After grouping all murders into those three groups, it then looks for clusters that had a very low clearance rate.
Mm.
And when that happens, we look hard at those cases, trying to put names and narratives to the data files.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do that, we often come away with thinking that there's a very real possibility that these murders were committed by the same guy.
Okay.
And we've done that dozens of times. In most cases, when we contact police or check the history books, these are known serial killings. But
Wow.
often it does not happen that way, that police are not aware of the pattern because of a phenomenon that criminologists call linkage blindness. Because of the way that
Mm.
we investigate murder, when someone is killed, a detective is assigned to the case. When someone else is killed, usually a different detective is assigned to the case.
Mm-hmm.
If there are commonalities to the cases, those commonalities usually get missed unless the detectives have a conversation over the water cooler or someplace.
Right.
If the cases occur in adjoining jurisdictions, that conversation simply never happens. So
So
linkage blindness is a documented problem. Criminologists and sociologists believe that most series go unconnected because of linkage blindness. So the
that
purpose of the algorithm is to try to overcome that problem.
okay, so that's great. Now, so that makes a lot of sense because another thing that could potentially be a problem with that, in my opinion, would be possibly that police usually, when someone is killed, start looking for friends, family members, co-workers, people that knew them. But with serial killers, it's just random people sometimes, or specific targeted groups of people, or yeah, targeted groups of people like sex workers, or all men or all women, like you said, and would have nothing to do with the family and coworkers.
Right.
So I think sometimes they have tunnel vision, it seems like, in certain cases.
Well, police try to apply common sense. I mean, most of the time, when Americans are murdered, they're murdered by someone they know. I
Right,
mean,
absolutely.
that is simply the truth. And
Right,
so police would be remiss not to consider that as a real possibility because statistically it's a probability.
right,
The
absolutely.
problem is that serial killers usually don't know. There's no personal relationship between the killer and their victim. They
Right.
are often killers of opportunity. They go out for a walk, which I think literally happened in the Chicago cluster. They go out for a walk looking for some vulnerable woman who they can slay. Um,
Mm-hmm.
anyway, there is no previous relationship between the killer and the victim, which of course makes the case much harder to solve.
Right. And I
So
think
that's
that's why they get away with so many of these murders.
right, because by definition, a serial murder is more difficult to solve. Being
Mm-hmm.
aware that there is a, an increased probability that these are connected killings can help police. But yes, it is a real problem, and police are doing the best they can with inadequate
Mm-hmm.
resources. We don't have enough detectives, we don't have enough crime scene technicians, we don't have enough laboratory capacity, we don't have
Mm-hmm.
enough beat cops who can knock on doors asking, "Did you hear anything last night, lady?" We don't have enough of all of that, and we especially
Right.
don't have enough of that in Chicago. Chicago has a very low clearance rate compared to other cities, and it's a real problem. But it's a problem everywhere. In 2020, we hit a new low in the United States. Only 54% of our murders were cleared by arrest. That's the
Wow.
lowest it has ever been in America, so it's been getting worse.
Wow. So that's really awful. Now, so about these murders in Chicago. So when would you say that these strangulations, the unsolved strangulations actually started to become noticed?
Well, our algorithm first detected the cluster in about 2015, maybe
Okay.
2014. The data always come in a year or two behind. So by the time we had 2012 murders in our system, that was a sufficiency to uh, to run afoul of the algorithm. So the algorithm started signaling red alert, starting with the data that we had received in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
It pointed to a cluster going back to about the turn of the century. And in the end, as this cluster went on, as time went on, the cluster got larger so that we have a cluster of 51 women who were murdered from 2001 to 2018. None of those murders were cleared through arrest,
Mm.
and they were all strangled, so the weapon was the same. Almost all of them were strangled out of doors, suggesting not a relationship murder, but a stranger on stranger murder.
Right.
Um, and that's very unusual. In fact, everything about the Chicago cluster is unusual. Um, Most strangulations occur indoors, but these were all out of doors. And there's no difference between strangling a woman and shooting her. I mean, most murders of women are solved. About
Mm-hmm.
77% of all female murders are solved. But in this cluster, none of them, well, of the 51, none were solved. But in the overall cluster, only about a third, less than a third, were solved. And that's a
Wow.
super red alert when you have an elevated rate of failure to solve in cases that normally get solved. Something's
Mm-hmm.
wrong. So at the time, even though Chicago has a low clearance rate, murders of women are much more likely to be solved than murders of men. Again, because women tend to be murdered by people they know,
Right.
husbands, boyfriends, people living in the
Mm-hmm.
household, much more so than men. So for that reason, murders of women, even in Chicago, have a much higher clearance rate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was true for everything except victims of strangulation and asphyxiation. In Chicago, most of those cases went unsolved. Whereas everywhere else in America, most strangulation cases get solved quickly
Mm-hmm.
at the same rate as all other methods of killing because when women are strangled, they're usually strangled by someone they know.
Right.
In this case, in the case of the 51, they were none of them were solved, and it really looked like a stranger on stranger killing. When we started getting details on each of these cases, there were
Mm-hmm.
other similarities. The strangulations occurred predominantly in the south side, the near south side, the far south side, and the near west side. We found that in the near south side killings, there was a linear pattern to where the victim bodies were recovered.
Mm-hmm.
That we had quite a few murders that occurred along the Chicago Transit Authority's Green Line. In fact, I'm surprised the killer wasn't tagged the Green Line killer by the media, but there
Mm-hmm.
was a definite pattern of victims along the that particular CTA line.
Wow.
Um, in several cases, in most cases, the women were found in abandoned buildings, empty alleyways, often dumped in trash cans.
Mm.
In many cases, in some cases, the trash cans were set on fire. These were
Wow.
highly specific patterns, very unusual patterns, highly suggestive of serial murder. Also, in most of the cases, there were sexual overtones to the murder. The women were recovered nude or partly nude or in some way sexually disrespected. In many cases, there were signs of sexual intercourse.
Mm-hmm.
Serial murder often has a sexual component. Um, Now, I hate to speak ill of serial killers, but these guys are often screwed up, and they have
Right.
a problem. They have a problem with women, and so
Yes.
they get their jollies by killing them. That's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a sexual release for them.
Right.
Again, all of the elements when you pull the narratives of these 51 cases, as I've said many times, they just scream serial killer. We actually think there were two or three serial killers involved, one of whom was white. The other two we think were African American.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we think that we know. We think that we know the identity of one of the killers. We think he's a man in prison in Indiana, Darren Dion Vaughn. It's spelled Vann, V-A-N-N, but he pronounces it Vaughn. He's in
Okay.
prison in Indiana for the rest of his life for strangling 7 women in the Gary, Indiana area over a 10-month period. We
Wow.
think 7 is not the right number. We think he's killed
Mm-hmm.
a good deal more than that. He himself has confessed during his interviews with Hammond police.
Mm-hmm.
He confessed to killing many more women. In fact, if his confession is anything like accurate, he may be the third most dangerous serial killer in modern history.
Wow.
Anyway, we have encouraged the FBI and the Chicago police to try to interview Mr. Vaughn. They have tried. As far as we know, he has resisted providing any substantive information.
Now
But
I was going to
go
say
ahead.
I did read that on your website. That basically he doesn't want to talk and give details of other states and murders because he doesn't want that to prolong his execution, or he's doing life, but he was afraid of that would prolong his time or something like that if he was to get the death penalty, and thinking that states would be arguing over who's going to prosecute him and all of that. Is that
Yeah.
basically what he was trying to say?
So he has said in interviews that he is responsible for dozens of murders, but he made a mistake. He killed a woman. He had been operating mostly in Gary, Indiana, and then we think in
Mm-hmm.
Chicago. But he made a mistake and he killed a woman in a Motel 6 in Hammond, Indiana. The Hammond Police Department made a quick arrest, and as often happens with these guys, he was very talky at first. For
Mm-hmm.
several days, he was interviewed for hours and hours, and we have those tapes.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to be executed. He did not want to spend the rest of his life in prison. So he spoke at length about all that he had done, and he took police to 6 other abandoned buildings in Gary, Indiana, where he had left his victims. He said he did not want to spend his life in prison. He wanted to be executed. And so he was cooperating to make a strong case against himself in Indiana. He said he did not want to allocute to his crimes in Illinois because he did not want competition between the two states over who would get the right to execute him. He thought that would delay
Wow.
his execution. He
Wow.
later changed his mind and decided he wanted to live. And so
Okay.
because of that, he is not talking anymore. But
Mm.
I guess if he were to allocute to the many murders he said he did in Illinois, he might face the death penalty again. And so he may not have
Wonder.
much of a reason to want to allocute to those crimes.
Right.
Although we recommend for the good of his soul that he should fess up to everything he's done. We think he could cut a deal that if he would agree to clear these cases and explain to families what happened, he could probably avoid execution.
Hmm.
So I think if he were of a mind to want to confess, and confession, as we say, is good for the soul, that
Right.
he might be able to cut a deal. But as far as we know, none of that is happening.
Hmm.
He says he killed way more victims in Illinois than he did in Indiana. We have no reason to call him a liar. And
Hmm.
I have to say that his MO, the method of killing for the women in Gary, Indiana, seemed to match exactly the MO for most of the murders in Chicago.
Well, then here's the question that I have. Now, speaking of that, so I listened to some of his confession, and he talked about killing in California, Texas. Said he killed only one person in North Carolina, and that's because he wasn't there very long.
Yeah,
Detroit and Illinois, Gary, Indiana, etc. That reminded me of how Ted Bundy killed in Washington State, Utah, Colorado, um, Oregon, and California. So one thing that I want to ask you is because when Ted Bundy was doing this, he actually actually, they reported that some of the killings dropped off, the number of killings, after Ted Bundy left certain states, and then it picked up in other states. Now, did you seem to notice any type of fluctuation with his movements, Vaughn? That is similar
absolutely.
to Ted Bundy's. Okay.
Right. So Vaughn has an interesting timeline. He moved down to Texas. He had a marriage to a woman who was like 30 years older than he,
Mm-hmm.
and they had a difficult marriage. She moved down to Texas, and he moved down with her sometime in late 2006, but probably in middle to late 2007. He moved
Okay.
to Texas. He promptly got arrested for sexual assault. Texans don't take kindly to people who rape women.
Mm-hmm.
He spent 5 years in a Texas prison. During that time, the murders in Chicago dropped precipitously.
Wow.
So we think Mr. Vann is responsible for perhaps the lion's share of these murders, but not all of them.
Mm-hmm.
When he was not available, there was a drastic decline uh, in in these killings. So the record and the timeline kind of mash up. So we don't think he killed them all, but
Mm-hmm.
we think there's no reason um, to think he was lying when he was confessing to killing way more people in
Right.
Illinois than in Indiana. In fact, we think the records support his claim.
Okay.
Um,
That definitely
now,
seems like it. Definitely seems like it. So now here's the thing too. So in May of this year, I actually did a report on a woman who's 36 years old, a black woman who was found chained up in an abandoned building, and she was actually on the 119th block of Eggleston in the West Pullman neighborhood. Now I want to know if and the person who did this to her, they haven't been caught. She said it was a black male and it was someone that she was familiar with in the area, I suppose. She'd been there for days before someone walking down the street heard her cries or whatever. My question is, I don't know much about Chicago. So South Eggleston, would you say that's anywhere near any of these crime scenes that you talk
I'm not
about?
sure Which broad area was it? South side, west side? Do you know?
It says South Eggleston in West Pullman, in the West Pullman neighborhood.
I'm sorry. I grew up in Chicago, but that was years ago. I'm not sure where that is. We have
Okay.
a map. We have a map of where the victims are. If you click on the map, you'll call it up, and then you can geocode where that case was, and you
Okay.
can easily see whether she was in any of those three uh, killing fields for the
Mm-hmm.
Chicago cluster. But I'm
Okay.
sorry, I don't know just with an address.
Okay. And so now
Send
you said there
send
was
me
I'm sorry, go ahead.
send me an email with the address, and I'll try to answer that question.
Okay, okay, great. No problem. I definitely would do that. Now, so you mentioned that there may be two or three killers, one of them white and two possibly black. Now, with that all being said, do you think that any of these supposed killers, do you think maybe one of them was maybe a copycat, or maybe they, you know, just had, or the same types of killers? I mean, we know they're serial killers, but like with the same types of, not only MO but motive maybe. Because with Vaughn, for example, now I read on your site that Vaughn basically said he was killing these women at random, and he was doing it because it made him feel relaxed or something like that. It made him feel better. It
This is what
seemed to
he
me.
said. Yeah, you can hear his confession
Mm-hmm,
at our site, and it's a 10-minute recording. He said when the killing urges struck him, he needed to get out of his home. He was living, I believe, with his brother at the time and his brother's family, and
mm-hmm.
he needed to get away. He didn't want to hurt his family, so he would take a bus or take a train to get away, and then he would randomly locate women and kill them. That's what he said, and
Yeah.
we think that's true, and we think that is what was happening in Chicago.
Hmm. Yeah, that definitely sounds like what was happening, especially since you already said that a lot of these were committed on somebody that was on that train route, Green Line.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that definitely adds up. That all makes sense to me. So let me ask you this: have the Chicago police ever compared Vaughn's DNA to any of the DNA found on the victims? Because I know one family member said that their sister, I believe it was, had DNA under her nails when she'd been fighting for her life.
Yeah, we are not certain exactly what DNA was run in the case.
Okay.
We know that in only in 18 of the cases was any foreign DNA recovered,
Hmm.
which is
Okay.
very unusual. Uh, and as the murders uh, progressed, the pattern started in 2001, and
Mm-hmm.
as you go on the timeline, the rate at which DNA was recovered declined, so that the last time DNA was recovered was in the year 2009, and murders after that there was zero DNA recovered.
Really?
That that is very unusual.
That
Um,
sounds very strange.
in fact, we had conversations with Chicago detectives on that very question because DNA technology has only gotten better over time,
Right.
and they confirm that police are increasingly likely to recover DNA from a crime scene. The technology has gotten better and better, and they don't have an explanation for why the opposite happened in these 51 murders. But as time went on, it became less and less likely that DNA would be recovered. We don't have an explanation for that.
Hmm.
Chicago police do not have an explanation for that. A possibility is that the two or three killers involved were getting better at their craft and were getting better at not leaving DNA behind them.
Right.
But that's only speculation. We don't have an answer, but there is very little DNA. The reason that we suspect at least that one of the serial killers is white is
Mm-hmm.
because there was a cross match. Um, there was one of the women, I won't say who, but one of the women early on in the pattern, a white woman, was murdered, and they did recover uh, DNA probably from her assailant. That DNA matched to a sexual assault case in which the woman survived.
Mm.
And she described a white male with a mustache who seemed to be faking an Hispanic accent, trying to pass for Hispanic.
Really?
Um, Chicago detectives, when the murder came down, and when they had the what's called a CODIS hit, the combined DNA database that the FBI operates, when it was
Hmm.
shown that the two cases were committed by the same assailant, um, she was interviewed by police asking, uh, could there be? Oh, I'm sorry. The sister of the victim was asked, did you ever see anyone that was like that? A white man with a mustache pretending to have an Hispanic accent. And the sister of the victim said, no, that does not ring a bell. She was very active. Both women were involved in prostitution. In fact, a
Mm.
great many of these victims were involved in prostitution or illegal drug use or both,
Yeah, that
often
was going
both.
to be my next question. If they were sex workers or had something in common other than race in most cases, as to why these killers would choose them. So that makes a lot of sense because these people are usually easy targets because they're out late at night. They're often not so cautious about just going up to people that are strangers and things like that because they're trying to make their money or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, I was talking to a Dallas homicide investigator
Hmm.
who put it this way. You know, in one way, you have to pity the poor serial killer. What other kind of woman will willingly get into your panel van late at night? And
Right.
yeah, so that's why there are 1,000 good reasons why we wouldn't want our children to become sex workers. But a really good one is they have a very high rate of being murdered. It's a
Right.
very dangerous occupation. Nobody, I think, chooses to be a sex worker, and there's a good reason not to, and this is a really good reason. They
Hmm.
are favorite targets for serial killers or just people who maybe don't kill lots of people, but will commit murder from time to time.
Right. And so I
It's a very serious, yeah.
do you think that Vaughn, looking at the confession, I don't get it, but do you think that at any time other than the confession, do you think there's any time that he showed any type of remorse for what he had done? Because when he was talking about it on the confession tapes, it just sounded matter of factly like he was telling us what he basically had for lunch or something.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not a psychologist, but much has been written about dissociative disorder, that
Hmm.
serial killers often have difficulty treating other people as human beings, that they don't
Right.
look upon people as people.
Like
They are,
objects.
exactly, they dissociate with other
Hmm.
people, especially with their preferred victim type. So
Hmm.
again, I hate to speak ill of serial killers, but they have real problems in dealing with people. They're a
Right.
mess.
Right, they
Yeah.
absolutely are. So I'll say this much. So by the fact that there has been basically not much DNA evidence left after 2009 and all of that, and you say these killers may have gotten better at their craft, which is likely, it would lead me to think that maybe these are organized serial killers because that's usually what they're pretty good at is cleaning up the mess after the fact and disposing of evidence. Whereas the unorganized serial killers, they're the ones that likely leave stuff at the crime scene.
Ah, well, you know a little bit about murder then. Yeah, there are, generally speaking, organized and disorganized crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I would say that these are practiced killers, by and large.
Mm-hmm.
Um, are they organized? Are they picking a victim and stalking the victim? And no, I think these were mostly random murders, um, opportunistic killings,
Right.
not not uh, this was no Hannibal Lecter genius killer. I mean, in fact,
Mm-hmm.
again, serial killers are usually not very bright,
Mm-hmm.
and they kill when they think they can get away with it, but they've gotten pretty good at getting away with it.
Right.
And I think that's what we're dealing with in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what it seems to be. So, well, hopefully there'll be some answers for the family so they can get closure because this has been going on for quite some time now. I'm just wondering, after all of your evidence that you and your organization have, come across and everything that you've researched, the algorithm showing the clusters where the crime scenes and the bodies were found and those things, I'm just curious as to why they still are hesitant to say that it's a serial killer. They don't seem to think that it's a serial killer. I mean, the evidence looks like it to me, especially the patterns of the strangulations, victims killed in the same way, victims, most being disproportionately of the same race, same type of work and stuff like that. It just
Well, so there is a
seems like
difference.
it's
There's a big difference between what a cop tells a television camera and what a cop thinks. And so
okay.
I've had long conversations with one detective in particular who's overseen these cases,
Mm-hmm.
and he said that any reasonable person would conclude that these are connected cases,
Okay.
but they don't have proof. The DNA does not match up. There's very little DNA.
Mm-hmm.
There is at least one case in which one of the murders cross matches to a sexual assault. There may be others of those, but there's at least one.
Mm-hmm.
But that's as close to you get to checking the box serial killer without actually checking it, because
Right.
you have to have two or more killings, not one killing and one sexual assault. But I would
Mm-hmm.
be astonished if the guy who raped a woman and then raped and killed a woman, um, that's all he did. I would be very, very surprised.
Right.
But they don't have proof. And, the Chicago Police Department has to go by evidence.
Right. Yeah, because knowing
Murder,
is one thing and proving's another. That's
right.
what they always say.
So Chicago detectives and the FBI both believe that these are uh, highly likely to be connected cases, but they don't have
Hmm.
proof. The
Okay.
FBI
Well, that
definitely
makes
has been
sense.
aware of this pattern for a while, they tell me.
Hmm. Okay. So, well, I think that is pretty much all I had to ask. Now, another thing is this guy Vaughn, very interesting character. Just listening to him, the way he described, the things that he did and the different states that he went to and all of that. Um, have any of these family members of the victims, have they asked to, have they basically asked for any information about him? Or have some of the people who are still looking for answers or, whose cases are unsolved, their family members' cases are unsolved, have they, said anything possibly about, thinking that maybe he had something to do with it?
I believe there has been community leaders and family members who have reached out to Mr. Vaughn asking that he agree to speak with them or to speak with the detectives. As far as I know, nothing has come of that.
Nothing has come.
Um, yeah. By the way, I'd like to make an appeal, since you have an audience, that
Okay.
Vaughn was not the only killer. That we believe that there are probably at least three killers,
Mm-hmm.
and that it is highly likely that there are people who met these killers and survived. And if they were to come forward to police, to if they can go to our website at murderdata.org. They can read the report that we did for the Chicago City Council. We name all of the victims and describe the location and nature of the
Mm-hmm.
murder. If any of that rings a bell with them, quite often uh, women who survive their encounters know in their very heart that they're lucky that they met a killer.
Right.
And if they would be willing to come forward and to say what they know and to describe their assailant, they could actually break a case wide open. Not all of these victims are Mr. Vann's work. And
Hmm.
there are still guys out there who have not been given credit for what they've done.
Right.
And if a lady out there survived an encounter, she knows what happened. And if
Hmm.
she would uh, take a deep breath and do the right thing and call the Chicago Police Department or send me an email and I'll put them in touch with the right people, um,
Okay.
they would be doing the right thing.
Okay, absolutely. And I definitely will appeal to my audience about that. And I'm also going to do another broadcast about this. I'm going to post this interview, but I'm also going to do a broadcast about it and show, you know, the clusters that you came across, or the patterns of the sites. I'm going to show the women's names and all of that, and also Vaughn's
Great.
confession. So,
Good.
and hopefully, if somebody did survive any of these assaults, or from these killers, then hopefully somebody will absolutely come forward. I hope so.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. Thank you. I really appreciate you taking our time to come on here. I know you're busy. And I'll be, keeping in touch with you to see if there's any more updates and things like that. Um, I really
Call
appreciate the
anytime.
hard, yes, absolutely. And I really appreciate the hard work that you and your nonprofit organization put into trying to get these cases solved, all your work and research and all of that. Really
Well,
appreciate
thanks.
that.
We're mostly just nerds. We try to count things, but yeah, this is a lovely way to spend a retirement. I've never had a
Right.
better job.
Absolutely, absolutely solving crime. So I appreciate it. I absolutely do. So I want to thank you so much for coming on here, Mr. Thomas Hargrove. And I'll be keeping in touch with you. And I hope you have a blessed and wonderful rest of your day.
Same to you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Talk to you later.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.